Welcome to the Cultist King podcast. You're listening to the Duke and my co-host, Rambling Bones.
Hello again.
And, Rambling Bones, what is it we do here?
Well, here we talk about cult movies. What are cult movies? Cult movies are the kind of crap that you see and no one else knows about it but you. And you've got to show it to all your friends. And it spreads. It has a cult following, if you will.
Now, this movie that we're going to today, though, is definitely not crap. And perfect for Halloween if you're listening to this when this is dropping. Happy Halloween, everybody. This movie is House on Haunted Hill.
The William Castle classic.
The William Castle classic, made in 1958. Just to let you know right up front, this is one of my absolute favorite movies. This scared the crap out of me when I was a little kid, and I've just loved it ever since. So, the premise of House on Haunted Hill is that Frederick Loren, an eccentric millionaire played by Vincent Price, is having a little party with his wife. You see, he has invited 6 guests, none of which know him or know each other, to stay in a haunted house with him for the night. However, despite the fact that none of them know each other, everybody's motivated to come because they've all been promised $10,000 should they stay the entire night and, of course, survive. In the event any of them pass away or have some sort of unfortunate accident, their $10,000 will be divided amongst the rest of the guests. And of course, things quickly hit the fan, and I think that's a good place to end on for now. What do you think?
Yeah, just hijinks ensue.
Hijinks ensue.
But yeah, that's essentially the plot, I'd say.
Well, and this movie had some very interesting marketing. If you guys know anything about William Castle, and you might not, he was known for being a huge showman. He was a B-movie director for the most part, usually for Columbia Pictures, though this one was Allied Pictures, and his movies tended to have some sort of a bizarre gimmick to them, usually something to get butts in the seat. And, for example, he had a movie called Macabre, and he actually went to Lloyd's of London and got an insurance policy that he informed all of the viewers, should anybody die of fright during the movie, their loved ones would be the recipient of an insurance policy should anybody be scared to death.
Or his movie Mr. Sardonicus, where the audiences got to vote on the ending. There was no, there weren't 2 endings. You got to vote and everyone got the same ending every time.
That being said, despite, don't get me wrong, despite all of his goofy gimmicks and stuff that really, I think they just made the movies more fun, and they definitely did get butts in the seats, but he was a very competent director. In fact, he's one of my favorite directors. The studios usually trusted him because he could turn a little bit of money into a lot of money. He was a very competent director. They'd get a few good actors. They would take some sort of movie, usually horror, or he did do a few of more like mystery thriller types in his early career, and he could usually make success out of them.
Yeah, he's a good example, and this movie especially is a great example of the modern horror movie formula for studios, in that they put in very little money and they make a crap load of money off of it because people will go and see horror movies regardless of quality. This movie was, I believe, $200,000 budget.
That's correct.
And made $2.5 million.
Right. So the studio had to be happy with that. In fact, to give you kind of the idea of some of the shenanigans William Castle did for this, for one, the movie poster for this movie depicts a giant skeleton holding a noose that a woman is hanging from. A lot of the papers weren't sure that this was an image they wanted to run, so some papers wouldn't advertise this movie. So what does William Castle say? He says, "This movie is so scary, even the ads are too frightening to run."
The biggest thing, I think, is that this movie was filmed in Emergo, which doesn't mean that it was filmed in any special way. What it means is that there's a glow-in-the-dark plastic skeleton being pulled on a string across the theater in the middle of the movie at a certain point where a certain skeleton shows up.
You know what, though? By all accounts, the audience loved it. Vincent Price described actually going to one of the screenings, and he was watching himself, reel out the skeleton on the screen, and the skeleton is coming out at the crowd, and they're screaming and everything. I mean, I really wish that movies would do stuff like now, even if it was silly. It just gave you a reason to see it in person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
These are just the tip of the icebergs. Every movie had several kinds of interesting ideas he would have. He kind of just threw everything at the wall and saw what stuck.
Yeah, his movies, some of the gimmicks really sort of cross that line between maybe cinema and theater, and that, it does have that audience engagement outside of what's there. Was it 4D? Is that what they like to call it, where, the film actually comes out and
Yeah.
interacts with the audience?
Well, and some of that might be that William Castle actually had his background in theater, at least in the early days. William Castle, if you ever get the chance, if you watch this movie and you want to know more, he has an autobiography that was written just before his death called "I'm Going to Scare the Pants Right Off America," and he's really the kind of guy who just started from absolutely nothing and just BS'd and schmoozed and lucked his way from gig to gig, just working his way up. And I mean, just working his pants off and coming at things from angles nobody would expect. And he built a pretty solid career out of it.
Yeah, and we mentioned Vincent Price was in this movie. How did he end up getting Vincent Price to do this?
Well, just kind of a fortuitous meeting. He was walking in and he had the idea for this movie, but he didn't have a leading man. So he walks into just some diner in Hollywood, and there's a very depressed looking Vincent Price looking into his coffee. So he's like, oh, hey, Mr. Price, you might not remember me. Do you mind if I sit with you? And he's like, what's up? And Vincent's like, I'm very upset right now. There's this movie I wanted for the part for, and I didn't get it. And he's like, well, this is your lucky day. I think this is a chance meeting because I happen to have a script that would be perfect for you. So he pitches the script over pie to Vincent Price, and Vincent Price likes it so much that he agrees not only to do this picture, but a second one called The Tingler, which I would be very surprised if that doesn't show up on this podcast later, as it's another favorite of mine.
Yeah. We've talked about Vincent Price multiple times now, but I guess some quick things that he was in. He was in House of Wax, the Tingler, which we mentioned,
The Fly.
The Fly. I don't know if you've seen an old horror movie, you've probably seen Vincent Price at some point.
Yeah, it'd kind of be hard to miss him if you have any love of old movies at all.
I wrote down some of the other actors. Some of the actors didn't really do much. Wow.
And some of them did a list of movies, but not any that you guys would probably be aware of unless you've just watched, every movie from the 50s.
Richard Long stood out to me the most. He plays the character of Lance, and Lance is
kind of our pseudo-protagonist.
Yeah, it's not quite the strong leading man, but, he's a standout. And he is Jared Barkley in the Big Valley television show. He was Tom Kettle in the Ma and Pa Kettle movies, and he is in Cult of the Cobra.
Doesn't sound like Cobra make.
Thank you, dude. Very cool. But other than that, I didn't see anything particularly culty or standouty. However, someone who definitely stands out is Elijah Cook Jr. His character is Watson Pritchard, and Pritchard he's the owner of the house on Haunted Hill.
And a bit of a lush.
Yeah. Vincent Price's character is renting the house from him because, Pritchard needs the money.
But unfortunately, Pritchard this whole time is on edge because you see his, I believe it was his sister.
Nope, brother.
His brother and his sister-in-law were murdered in this house.
Yeah.
Which is apparently not the first or even the second murder that was committed in this house. And he is 100% fully convinced this house is haunted.
But Elijah Cook was in The Night Stalker. He was in Blackula. He was in Rosemary's Baby. And my favorite made-for-TV movie, Salem's Lot.
Well, and in addition to that, he was also in a lot of, I hate to say respectable pictures, but in a lot of ones that are just, for lack of a better word, regular classics. I had recognized him because he had been in another one of my favorite movies, The Big Sleep.
Yeah.
But he was a guy who was just constantly receiving work for many decades.
A character actor type. He was never a leading man, but he always found work playing a certain type of mousy, weaselly character.
Really good in this movie, but probably not as appreciated as she should be, just for her career in general, is Annabelle Lauren's actor, Carol Omar. I got the feeling when I was researching her that at one point she was being groomed to be one of the next great leading ladies. Unfortunately, though, one of her first movies was The Scarlet Hour, which cast her, I want to say that there's like a suicide, that she commits suicide at the end or something, and there's like adultery at some point. This is not a movie I've seen, but whatever the case is, it was a very bad movie to establish herself as the next leading lady. And then I think she eventually kind of gave up and started a family, but it's kind of a pity nothing more came of her career because she's very good in this.
Yes.
Especially since, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Well, I was going to say she's just very good as a horrible, terrible wife.
Yes. Well, and to reveal a little more of the plot here, so this is kind of a big spoiler. So if you have any inkling that this might be a film that you want to see, I'm going to go ahead and advise that you go ahead and just watch it first, even if you've gotten to this point, because one, it's very good, and two, it's in the public domain, so you can watch it for free virtually anywhere. But basically, Vincent Price's character, this is not his first wife. He's had a few others, and all of them have met mysterious ends. One disappeared, and at least two have had heart attacks. Now, Annabelle's not an innocent victim here. She knows this and has a plot of her own. You see, one of the other women who's there is a little on the unstable side. And Annabelle, halfway through the movie, or early in the movie, I think, maybe the first third, she fakes her death, that she has committed suicide. But then she keeps appearing to this woman, and before that she was trying to convince this woman that her husband is up to no good and is probably going to try to kill her. The whole goal of this is to get everybody so worked up that she accidentally will at some point shoot Vincent's character.
Yes.
Because each of them has been given a party favor, the party favor being a loaded revolver.
Yeah, Vincent Price literally has all these coffins that just have a gun in it. And
like all good parties in America,
he's just handing them out.
And of course, she's working with another one of the guests.
There's a doctor, Dr. Trent, and he is in the movie. I don't know, he doesn't really stand out that much to me, other than...
He has some good back and forth with Vincent Price at some point. But yeah, his big thing is that he's helping the scheme along.
Because they would like Vincent's money. And Vincent, early on, it's established that he would actually just like to have a divorce. But Annabelle does not want a divorce. She wants all of the money.
Oh, and it's also more than implied that this has not been her first attempt on his life. So they're just the couple of the year, really.
Honestly.
But she definitely is one of the standouts, I think, in this movie. Also kind of an interesting character in this house is the house itself, which this is not the first time we've seen this house in this show. Where else have we seen this?
So this is the Ennis house, and this we talked about this briefly on our episode of House of Frankenstein.
Our second ever episode, which you can go and watch.
And this house was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. I guess if you like postmodern architecture, you probably like Frank Lloyd Wright. There's no accounting for taste, I guess.
But needless to say, it even in its time, it was considered a historic house.
This house is cool. I'll say that. Of all of his work that I've seen, I think this house is cool. And this house has a tendency to show up in movies.
Now, granted, only the exterior shows up in this movie. There was no way that they were going to allow William Castle inside of this building, which is probably for the better.
Well, I think it's funny. I've seen there's maybe like 2 different posters for this movie. The most famous poster being the one with the skeleton holding the hanged woman. But the house in the poster is not the Ennis house, and the interior of the house is not at all what would be inside of the Ennis house either. You have essentially 3 different mansions being portrayed.
So, once this movie was finished, they did some test screenings. And the first screening was among a more middle-aged crowd, and the response was somewhat tepid. So the next time, William Castle, who's, I guess, kind of his ethos is he's always kind of made movies aimed at kind of the teenagers at the time, especially since they were a lot of the movie going public. And he tried it with a younger audience, and it was a huge success. The movie did make a bit of a stir when it came out, so much is that this is listed as one of the inspirations for Hitchcock's Psycho, because he could see what could be done with kind of a horror thriller on a small budget and how successful it could be, because by all means this movie was a big success. It's kind of funny too that this was an inspiration for Hitchcock, because Hitchcock would go on to inspire William Castle to make his other movie, another good one called
Homicidal.
Homicidal.
I knew that one.
I had a brain fart. I've seen that movie. I like that movie. Actually, I like most things that William Castle has directed. Yeah.
I think, you talk about test screening this for younger audiences. This movie definitely has a lot of effective, scary points, I think. Even now, the most famous, I think, for most people who've seen this movie is there's a part where Nora, who is the more unstable girl that Annabelle was trying to make go crazy, she is down in the basement cellar area. She's looking around this wall, and all of a sudden, like, this terrifying old woman, like, just pops into view. And I think for many people, that was a traumatizing event.
It certainly was in my childhood.
However, what makes it even better is that she just rolls away.
Yeah, she just kind of glides off screen.
And then what you get another shot of her, and she is very obviously like standing on a wagon being pulled away.
That being said, when you first see her, it did scare a lot of people. There's also another good scene of her just like, in a dark room where they just kind of briefly glance her. That was pretty scary too.
Yeah.
And of course the spooky skeleton.
Oh yeah, but first, like, just the way the movie starts out, it just starts completely black, and you get spooky noises and screaming, which, watching it now, it's very silly. But I'm sure at the time, if you go to a theater and it's completely dark and then you just start hearing like a random woman screaming and you're not prepared for that, I could see that being at least a spooky experience.
Well, you weren't the only person who thought so, because while that might not stand out to anybody immediately as being notable, nothing like that had been quite done before. And a lot of movies would later go on to copy that, because most people at the time, it was very effective. People thought that was a very novel approach to opening.
But the skeleton is interesting, because at the end, when we realize that Annabelle is not actually dead, she is down in the cellar, and the cellar has this big vat of acid.
Yes, and so to kind of give some context to this scene, she was talking with Dr. Trent, and they know that Nora has gone down to the basement, where Dr. Trent has conveniently sent Mr. Frederick Lauren, and they hear the gunshots, and they fully expect him to be dead. Annabelle goes down there, and Vincent's nowhere to be found. But then she starts to hear his voice, and a skeleton emerges out of the vat of acid, which this would be that part we were talking about before, where this would be wheeled out into the theater. And yeah, the skeleton did a bang-up job. He's even credited as playing himself. But this isn't his only role. Could you tell us, what else did skeleton appear in?
On IMDb, somebody has attributed to the skeleton as having uncredited roles in Scary Movie 2, Jason and the Argonauts, Beetlejuice, and Army of Darkness. Also on IMDb, apparently if you have IMDb Pro, you can get Skeleton's contact information and agent info. So,
do you think we could get him on the show?
That would be a riveting interview.
Tune in, guys. We're gonna see what we can do.
And, the skeleton scene is also like, I remember being spooked by that as a little kid. However, much like the old woman that ends with, her being wheeled away, the fact that the skeleton is in reality like a giant marionette, it's weird because like you go from not seeing obvious strings. I mean, the fishing line is, you can sort of see it, but then like Frederick steps out from the shadows and he's got like this weird contraption attached to him that's got all these strings that he was using to work the skeleton.
Well, he scared her to death.
No,
well,
he
actually,
pushed her in the acid is what he did.
But she was scared and she died, so, potato patata.
Yeah. The movie is sort of, you aren't exactly sure whether the house is actually haunted or not, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Right, they keep it ambiguous for most of the movie, and then even at the end, after you kind of discover that this was Annabelle and Frederick plotting against each other, Watson Pritchard is still very much convinced that the house is haunted and that the night is not over.
Yeah.
Which I thought was a good way to end it.
Well, there was an interesting setup at the beginning where I think it was 6 different people had died in the house in, 6 different ways, and so there was a ghost for everybody.
Yes.
Like Lance gets hit in the head down in the basement, and apparently one of the ways that somebody died in the house was being bashed. They had their brains bashed out. And then like a chandelier falls, and apparently another way somebody else had died in the house was the chandelier falling on them. So you have these nice little setups.
Right, and for the most part, I think it's pretty effective. In fact, I think for modern audiences, what you might most appreciate about this is how much of just an archetypal haunted house movie there is. We have a lot of like movies where we have like ideas of what old movies used to be like, but you can't actually necessarily find these elements. But here you have a haunted house, you have Vincent Price, you have an honest-to-goodness skeleton scene, you have ghosts, like it's everything you could want from an old haunted house movie. It's all there.
Yeah, this has definitely been the inspiration or the blueprint for many a subsequent film.
Well,
it's really like the perfect setup.
Well, and that's one of the things. I think the premise of this movie is a very good one. Certainly very original at its time. The idea that you have all of these strangers with all of their own motivations coming to this house. And why are they being offered $10,000? What is this about surviving the night? What is the millionaire's end game? And what is him and his wife up to, there's a lot of reasons to keep watching once it starts. And it's a very fun and original premise. I really, really like this movie.
This movie was remade in 1999 with Chris Kattan, of all people, and an actor who was in The King's Speech, whose name escapes me at the moment. The movie is all right. Like, it's not... I mean, I think most people who like House on Haunted Hill are House on Haunted Hill purists, in that this is the movie and we don't talk about the remake. I think the remake it's like a movie. You can sit and watch it and turn your brain off.
Yeah, it seemed to do well enough, but it really hasn't had the effect on pop culture that this one had, just in the sense that nobody really talks about it. Oh, if you have cable, somebody might play this around Halloween, but this isn't a movie anybody's talking about. It was kind of interesting, though, because I want to say it was made by Dark Castle.
Yeah.
Which was a company originally established to do some remakes of William Castle's repertoire.
I believe they also remade 13 Ghosts.
They did.
With Matthew Lillard.
In that case, I think that one is one that's probably more known than the original. It's certainly maybe worth a watch just in how strange it is.
Yeah.
Though I prefer the original, but I'm also, I guess, to be fully, honest with everybody, I'm pretty much a William Castle fanboy, so it wasn't going to measure up for me.
Although 13 Ghosts and House on Haunted Hill were not exactly made in like the 2000s. Like I said, House on Haunted Hill was 99. They do sort of suffer from that 2000s style.
something that you probably didn't notice if you watched them growing up, but now a
It's
lot of those
can
like
be kind of painful at times, just the way they look and the way they decide to handle things. Now, House on Haunted Hill, I believe there are plans that live in developmental hell to like remake it again, but I don't think it'll probably happen anytime soon.
well, and I mean, I'm divided on whether I'd even want to see such a thing. I'm one of those people that
No.
like if a movie is made well, let it just live on as its own entity, you know? If you want to try a different approach to something, just make something new. House on Haunted Hill will always be this movie to me just because of just the huge part this movie's been in my life, you know?
Yeah, no, I really don't have any problems with this movie. This movie, it's not high art or anything, but
Says you.
it's not high art.
Says
It's
you.
very entertaining, and that's all I ask.
Well, you know what? Entertainment is the highest form of art.
I That's not true at all. But I feel like that's a debate for a later time.
Well, this movie was made to be fun, and it thoroughly succeeds.
Yes.
So I think I've pretty much said what I want to say about House on Haunted Hill. As far as for the rest of the points in the plot, you'll have to watch it yourself. The only thing I would caution you with is being in the public domain can be a good and a bad thing for movies. It's good because it's widely available, but keep in mind that a lot of like you go to the store and there's like a movie 40 pack of horror films. Most of those films wouldn't be well remastered. However, there have been several single copies of this movie released on both DVD and Blu-ray by some major studios. I should say major
Distribution.
Distributor would be a good word for it.
Yeah.
So I would recommend that you go and seek those out instead. Otherwise, you might your enjoyment might be dulled by a very fuzzy print.
And I'm sure YouTube, somebody's probably uploaded a high quality version of it. I'm sure you will also find absolutely horrible versions of it on YouTube as well. This movie shouldn't be that hard to find.
Oh, and it's kind of funny that it slipped into public domain at all because, one, I mean, it was made in 1958. So if somebody had cared about it, they could have held on to it. And I'm surprised Allied Pictures didn't because, at least at the time of this movie, it was the single most profitable picture they'd made ever up to that time. It's also one that still has a market. Like, it's not one that's fallen into complete obscurity. So I wonder how it slipped away.
I remember reading something that although it's public domain, somebody does have like the 35 millimeter print, and they do like still get requests for that.
Yes, no, I heard that too, that it's still pretty high demand. One thing that a lot of William Castle movies still enjoy, especially around Halloween, is a lot of these movies will have special showings in theaters again around Halloween, and a lot of times they'll have those with the gimmicks intact. For instance, for this film, there's still movie theaters you can go to where they'll run out the skeleton through the rafters at this point. In fact, a lot of it's with the original equipment, which survived.
Oh, wow. I'm amazed of all things, they didn't care enough to not let this movie fall into the public domain, but somebody held on to that.
Well, that kind of warms my heart just a little bit because I think as we've mentioned in some of these other movies, like a lot of the lovely models from things like, Black Scorpion or King Kong, nobody knew those were going to be worth anything. So they were just kind of poorly treated, cast aside, chopped up for new things. That's how a lot of important horror movie artifacts have gone. So the fact that there's still some of this original stuff out there is fantastic.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Well, I think that is all I have to say about this. Go watch it. Big recommend from the Duke.
Yeah, big recommend.
And that puts the ball in your court. Now, if you guys have been paying attention, we said last episode that the goal for November is we've gotten a long list of movies just from various comments left various places of things people like to see reviewed. So for November, we'll each be choosing from that list. So, ball's in your court. You've chosen one. What is it?
After much deliberation, I think we should kick off November with Supervan.
Oh boy.
I know nothing about it other than it's probably absolutely garbage, and I'm sure we'll have so much to say.
Well, you know what? I'm not going to put Supervan in a box. I haven't seen it. Maybe this is just a high art piece that's escaped me. Well, we'll find out.
We'll have our fingers crossed.
Will Supervan be super? The only way to know is to tune in next week for Colt is King.
Exactly. But yeah, thank you for listening.
Yeah, no, we appreciate you guys. Sorry that this came out a little late, but hey, Halloween.
It's on Halloween, yeah.
Perfect time to watch House's Haunted Hill or listen to expert podcasters speak about it.
Exactly.
Or you can listen to me and Bones.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this, you might leave a like or even comment a movie last minute to get into our running. And as I say every episode, keep it cold.
Yes, goodbye.